Thank you. Hello all. A warm welcome again to the first international conference on energy transition for sustainable development at the Somaiya Institute of Management. Before we start, a couple of announcements. We appreciate for keeping your Zoom in mute mode. We also would like to know that let you know that we are going live on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We are available there. And of course, for any questions, we would encourage using the chat facility to be posted throughout the session to me only. I'm again Dr. Shabani Bhattacharjee. Please post the Q&A to me, which will be taken up in due time. Okay, with that, good day once again to one and all for joining the first ever international conference on energy transition for sustainable development, which will be held from today onwards, that's 28th till 30th March for these 3 consecutive days. We are very glad to have amongst us respected dignitaries from Somaiya University, participants, invited guests, faculty, dear students, to grace the occasion as we all congregate for the virtual conference. Without much ado, I would now like to welcome Dr. Lakshmikant Hari, the conference convener, for the welcome address. Dr. Hari is a faculty at Somaiya Institute of Management and chairperson of Center of Sustainable Development. He is also chairperson of Library Committee and Digital Transformation Committee. He is a fellow from National Institute of Industrial Engineering, Mumbai. His interest lies in energy and development, sustainable development, sustainability, and business and transportation. He has publications in reputed national and international journals to his credit and has expertise of executing several funded research projects. Dr. Hari, please, for the welcome address.
Still on mute.
Yeah, thanks, Professor Shabani. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Rashekhan Pillai, sir, Director, Professor Manika Kanna, ma'am, dear colleagues, fellow researchers, students. I welcome you all for the first international conference on energy transition for the sustainable development, organized by the Center for Sustainable Development of Somaiya Institute of Management, Somaiya Vidyavihar University. Somaiya Institute of Management was established in the year 1981. He is consistently ranked among the top 20 to 25 management institutes and top 10 private sector B schools in India. It offers PhD, post-graduation, and management development programs on various specializations of business, management, and technology. The institute is also involved in various research and consultancy activities. Center for Sustainable Development was established in the year 2012 as an advanced research center focusing on areas such as energy, environment, business and sustainability, transportation, health, and development studies. The main objective of the center is to conduct research in the above said areas, develop project proposals in the area to seek the research grants, and get involved in various activities related to sustainable development within and outside the campus. The center currently have faculty members from different areas of management working on interdisciplinary research issues related to the business and sustainability. The center organized 3 pre-conference workshops in the past 2 months. The first one was on the systems thinking, held on 23rd and 24th February. Participants were introduced to the concepts and tools of systems thinking, and they also gained the hands-on experience on using these tools. The resource person for the workshop was Mr. Vihir Mathur, founder of Desta Research. The second pre-conference workshop was on, request all of you to keep in mind. The second pre-conference workshop was on measuring development, held from 21 to 23rd March. This workshop dealt with the both conceptual and practical issues in measuring development. It's considered different measures of development like poverty, inequality, inclusion, quality of life, human development, gender development, among others. It provided the clues among the alternative competing measures to decide which is a better measure. The workshop also explored the policy implications of measures. And the third pre-conference workshop was on sustainability assessment held on 25th and 26th March. The workshop covered the topics such as principles of sustainable development, evolution, perspectives, challenges of sustainable development, economic, environment, society interdependence, unsustainability risks and their impact on economy, society and environment, sustainable development frameworks for measuring sustainability, sustainable development goals, targets, indicators. Both these workshops, the measuring development and sustainability assessment, were conducted by Dr. Hippusal Krishnanathan from Institute of Rural Management, Anand. Coming to the theme of the conference, which is energy transition for sustainable development. Well, energy is the major cause for the carbon emissions and thereby climate change. Energy, the ones we use, the quantity we consume, the way we use matter to the ensure of sustainable development. Most of the countries are convinced that increasing usage of renewable energy such as solar and wind and using energy in the form of electricity will solve the environmental pollution and climate change problems to the great extent. But the problem of energy and environment are wicked problems. We are thinking by using electric vehicles will solve the issues of emissions. But we need to be aware that 70% of the electricity generated in India is from using coal. Transition to the electric vehicles is necessary, but while doing so, we are creating a huge supply problem of energy. Also in India, 2.4% of the households are yet to be electrified, and an average Indian household receives the electricity supply from for 20.6 hours per day from the grid. Looking at all these, the energy transition is essential, but it is not going to be easy. Addressing the issues in energy transition is essential to tackling the climate change issues. With growing concerns of climate change and increasing awareness about the same among the consumers, energy transition and sustainability is going to be the major aspect for all the businesses. The business has to play a significant role in transition, in terms of not only in terms of providing the solution, but also in terms of adopting the transition and learning from the front. This conference, Energy Transition for Sustainable Development, is aimed at providing the platform for ideas, discussions, on issues related to the energy transition. I hope we all will have a great time in learning together. I thank Honorable Chancellor, Vice Chancellor, and Director for all the support in organizing this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hari. That was an ideal opening. We are glad that we have been joined by Professor Dr. V.N. Rajashekaran Pillai. Welcome, sir. Professor V.N. Rajashekaran Pillai is the Vice Chancellor of Somaiya Vidyavihar University and Provost of Somaiya Vidyavihar and Somaiya Ayurvihar under the Somaiya Trust, Mumbai. He has been at the helm of affairs of many higher education and scientific research establishments for almost 50 years as a teacher, researcher, professor, and executive head of education, science, and technology establishment in the country and abroad. An elected fellow of the Indian Academy of Sciences, Professor Pillai is one of the top-cited chemistry researchers in the country. He created an internationally renowned research group in the area of polymer science. About 60 doctoral and postdoctoral researchers have been trained under his direct supervision in the University of Calicut, Mahatma Gandhi University, Kotan, University of Tübingen, at the University of Mainz, Germany. He was also a visiting research professor at the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. Sir, I request you to say a few words, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
There is a connectivity problem. First of all, Dr. Lakshmikant Hari, Dr. Monica Khanna, Dr. Satyendra Upadhyaya, organizing committee for this sustainable development conference, my colleagues, distinguished speakers. First of all, let me congratulate the KJ Somaiya Institute of Management, and Dr. Lakshmikant Hari for organizing an event of this kind. Somaiya Vidyavihar University has been very prominent and proactive in seeing to it that sustainable development initiatives are promoted in a very big way. We are looking at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and then maybe converting our educational offerings in such a way that they are meeting the sustainability standards. There is no need of emphasizing the importance of a conference of this kind to an audience like this. If you just look at the India's energy policy and also the nitrogen ammonia policy, we can see that there is lot of new things which have been suggested in the energy sector by the government of India. It is very important that our engineering departments, management departments, science and technology departments, they look at the energy policy of the country, and that is in line with the UN energy policy and the global policy also. The Prime Minister on February 22 this year declared the national energy policy, which is more or less the same as that of the national hydrogen policy. And this is going to be a major game changer in the industrial development and also in achieving the necessary, much desired minimum carbon footprint in our industrial systems. Our industries are going to be changed. Even transport is going to be changed. All these things are going to happen with the new energy policy. I would definitely request the organizers and also the Department of Sustainable Development in the KJ Somaiya Institute of Management look at the national energy policy and the national hydrogen policy, which is also called the national hydrogen and ammonia policy, because ammonia, the Fritz-Haber process, ammonia, that is the for every molecule of ammonia, we are producing 6 molecules of carbon dioxide. So when we just change the hydrogen and ammonia policy, definitely we are going to change the carbon footprint, and that is going to be a real game changer, not only in this country, all over the world. And therefore, it is very important that academics like us look into the priorities of the industrial development. Agriculture development is very important. Ammonia is very important. Ammonia can be produced in different ways also. Using solar energy, solar materials, all these things are going to play a big role in the industrial and development and sustainable industrial development of the country and all the whole world. I am not an expert in the field, but it's very important that our students and teachers understand the importance of sustainable development. And education for sustainable development, or ESD, is also a major field of academic intervention, and it is very important that our students, the teachers, the faculty, all of us participate in looking at education as a real instrument for achieving sustainable development. I wish the program all success. Let me congratulate each and every one of you for organizing this event. I am in a conference in Pune. I just took a few minutes out of the conference. Wish you the very best, and definitely I will attend towards the concluding session. Again, I will look at the recommendations and see how we can implement the recommendations in sustainable development. Dr. Satyendra Upadhyaya has also been just looking at the various sustainable development initiative and what could be our overall what is an index of sustainable development initiatives. So all these things should converge together and then put in the education sector, and our students and teachers should be proactive partners in sustainable development initiatives. Thank you very much. Once again, wish the program all success.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for showing us the path forward as we move ahead for the next development phases. With that, may I request now our director, Dr. Monica Khanna for addressing the audience. Ma'am, Dr. Monica Khanna is the director of KG Somaiya Institute of Management, Mumbai, and Dean of the Faculty of Management Studies at the Somaiya University. Dr. Monica has academic experience of 29 years and industry experience of 4 years. Ma'am is a visiting faculty at the universities in Germany and Russia. She has presented and published research papers at national and international conferences of repute and has been involved with international research projects also. Ma'am has won awards for case studies and development from the Aditya Birla India Center at the London Business School in 2007 and 8, Bombay Management Association's Best Teacher Award in 2007, award for the Somaiya Vidyavihar for the Best Teacher in 2014. Ma'am is also an elected member of the Executive Council of IMA for 2021-23 also. She has focused on building technology-led pedagogy at the institute itself, launching of niche MBA programs, and on quality in the delivery of management education. Ma'am, now request you to please take over.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and a very warm welcome to the first international conference on energy transition for sustainable development. In fact, I'm really very proud and privileged to be part of this conference today on the most important topic of energy transition for sustainable development. This important conference has been organized by the Center for Sustainable Development at KJ Somaiya Institute of Management, and it really makes me feel very proud of the manner in which the management school and specifically the center is taking the lead as far as sustainability and the issues around sustainable development is being addressed. Being an electrical engineer, I have always, I have been in the field of electrical energy. And today I once again think about these things. I used to always think and wonder about what is the linkages between energy and business growth. But today, after having gone through some of the issues that were being discussed on energy transition, I think the linkages between business growth, stability, and sustainable development has become very strongly established. And I think this really deserves a very good platform for research and debate and development. The pandemic has made us realize the importance of sustainable development. The focus is no longer just on GDP and making profits by the companies, but the emphasis has to be on human capital development and specifically the environment along with it. In fact, I was reading an article which said that we are the first generation to face such a serious climate issue and sustainable development issue, and maybe we may be the last generation to actually have an opportunity to solve it also. So I think the burden on this generation is very high. And for the future generations, for the incoming generations, we need to really very seriously focus on sustainable development, of which the energy transition is a very important part. As the world moves ahead, the climate change is a major problem, which needs really global attention and immediate action from all the stakeholders. I think this, if you ask me who are the stakeholders, I think each of us is a very important stakeholder, because we have also seen the manner in which the ecosystem is getting devastated, what are the linkages between the animal and the plant kingdom and the humanity. And each of us, it is our duty to really give attention to these issues. We are all stakeholders, in fact, in the planet Earth and in the humanity survival itself. Energy consumption is one of the major causes to climate change. Hence, it is imperative to acknowledge, address, and transition towards cleaner fuels. In fact, I would like to tell you that if you just stand next to a car or a vehicle where the air conditioner is on or where the engine is on, I think you actually see the heat emerging from that vehicle. And that itself shows us how much, if there are so many vehicles on the road, how much of energy and how much of heat is being generated by these vehicles. And this is really a cause for concern, because all of them lead to climate change. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 7, it focuses on affordable and clean energy to all. I think it is our duty that we should be researching this and providing clean energy to all of us. As the world moves to faster adoption of electric vehicles, addressing the challenges of energy transition is the foremost concern. I think it's not just about electrical energy, but there should be a lot of focus on wind energy. There should be a lot of focus on water-powered energy, solar energy, and so on. This conference is aimed at facilitating discussion around energy transition, and it need not be restricted only to one form of energy. Energy is the motive power, and I think all of us should be working on it, on thinking about it. The conference theme of energy transition for sustainable development is one of the few conferences among all the B schools in India which focuses on this research area. In fact, as I've told in the beginning, I'm really very happy and proud that KJ Somaiya Institute of Management is taking the lead in this particular area. And I hope that this will become something very big and prestigious in the years to come. The lineup of experts for this conference comes in with diverse and varied experience in the area of energy transition and sustainability. They will be presenting different facets of energy transition across geographical areas. The first keynote speaker, Professor Benjamin Sovacool, will be focusing on global energy transition, whereas the second one by Dr. Debajit Palit, happening tomorrow, highlights the issues in India's energy transition. There is an invited talk by Dr. Raman Ramachandran, who is the ex-CEO and MD of BASF in India and South Asia, and he will focus on the role of chemistry in sustainability and energy transition. Invited talk by Ms. Roma Balwani will stress the governance aspect of responsible business. The other sessions of the conference will focus on communicating sustainability, transition towards renewable energy, and paper presentations. I understand there are some very good papers that have come forward for this conference, and I'm very keen to listen to them and to understand what is the research and what are the focus areas as far as energy transition is concerned. So once again, congratulations to the organizing committee, and I wish a very happy learning and debating through the next 2 days. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for giving us that motivation and encouragement to go ahead. We feel energized, in fact, to go ahead with it. And ma'am has already briefed the flow that we are going to go ahead. Yes, definitely, that's a wonderful lineup of the dignitaries that we have amongst us. Thank you so much, ma'am. Now, may I request Professor Vineet Kumar A. Sri Raman to address the audience. Let me introduce Dr. Vineet Kumar to you all. He is an associate professor in the finance and economics area in the National Institute of Industrial Engineering, Mumbai. He did his doctoral degree in economics from the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, and have more than 15 years of academic experience, including teaching and research. His research interests are in sustainable mobility, energy economics, environmental natural resource valuation, and environmental policy, innovation systems, micro, small, and medium enterprises, and cluster competitiveness, and many others. He has undertaken research projects in the area of natural resource valuation, multimodal mobility preference of urban dwellers, regional innovation systems in food processing industry, etc. He has also got several research articles in peer-reviewed national and international journals to his credit. Vinil sir, we would now request you to address the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Shabani. You made me hero of the conference. I don't know whether I deserve it or not. That's a different story. Thank you very much, and hi, ma'am. It's after quite long time we got an opportunity to see each other in a virtual platform. Before joining NITI, I was very much part of KJ Somaiya, and I feel really proud of that particular thing, to be part of the legacy which is still continuing, and I hope it will continue again. In terms of this conference, yes, as everybody mentioned, it is one of the topic which need to be addressed in a very priority level, because the IPCC report 6 has already highlighted the problem of climate change. at a very significant level, because we have mentioned about, yes, we can have a tolerance level of 2 degrees Celsius, and we are coming to know that even with the 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in our temperature, things would have been much worse than we have ever imagined, and we are reaching it much faster as well. When in 1987, the first report on sustainable development, which is also known as the Brundtland Report, has highlighted regarding how we should be amend our living patterns, or the way we are harming our environment, with a report which is titled as Our Common Future. In 2019, there is a sustainable development report came from the UN, which is basically titled as Our Future is Now. Yes, we have to act now if we want to have a future. That's a very precise norm of it. And Professor Hari has already highlighted the importance of looking at our energy sector. When we have looked at the pathways to net zero, we have to understand that when we have to stick to our carbon emissions at 570 gigatons, we have to change the way we are keep on emitting carbon to the environment. Even though, say, we can, or we all will be knowing that the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere is only 0.04%. So you just imagine with 0.04%, we all are worried, even if small increment in that particular segment, and how much damage it can cause on the environment. So if we have to stick on to our net zero targets, or the pathways, if we want to stick on to that by 2050, if we want to attain the similar kind of net zero target, or 2070, or 2000, say 100, whatever the targets, we keep on pushing it. But this is a fact that energy sector is one of the major contributor to our carbon emissions. So in that particular context, the energy transition has got a significant importance. When we talk about energy transitions, we also need to understand what exactly our energy mix all about, how exactly our total energy is comprised of. When we talk about energy, we should not look at only in terms of the electricity. Yes, electricity is one significant part of it. That's why across the world, we are trying to switch over to renewable energy. And it has got significant implication as well. If you look at the two indices which is being published by two important organizations, that is World Economic Forum, that is Energy Transition Index, as well as the World Energy Council, the Energy Trilemma Index. If you are able to look at these two indices, we will be able to see that how we will be able to achieve this target. Because the Trilemma Index basically highlight, as the word suggests, it is very difficult to achieve a target between the energy security of ensuring energy availability to everybody, as well as to ensure energy equity. Equity is a very important element, because we talk about energy poverty, because whether all the people will be having the access to electricity. If they have access, we also need to ensure that whether they are having affordable. Professor Monica ma'am has clearly mentioned in the Sustainable Development Goal 7, it is about the sustainable electricity affordable to all, because it is the affordability is also ensuring. So to ensure the security as well as equity, with that we also need to ensure the sustainable development or the environmental sustainability. So we have to have the sustainable energy sources coming into play here at that particular point of time, to ensure we will be reducing the contribution to the global warming. So that's what is Energy Trilemma Index talk about. Whereas in the case of World Energy Forum's Energy Transition Index clearly state much bigger picture. It basically talk about how each country's system performance to accommodate this transition is ready. And it also will talk about the transition readiness. So in the case of system performance, it will also look at the security of the energy, the sustainability as well as how the economic development is taking place in the economy. Because why we require energy is to ensure the overall development and economic scenario in the system. In the same manner, when you're looking at the transition readiness, we will look at a much broader picture about the economy as well as the energy scenario. So where the energy system structure will be looking at, what are the government governance structure will be looking at, what are the regulatory framework in the place, whether we are able to have sufficient investment to ensure energy transition. So all these pictures need to be looked at, or these 3 days is going to bring several papers, several discussions on this particular front. And we are fortunate to have the right person to discuss it is the Professor Benjamin Sovacool. He will basically bring you the kind of learning which he has got in this particular level, how the different countries are getting to this sustainable energy sources. When you talk about, in the case of energy trilemma index as well as energy transition index, there is one single country which is performing really well. That is a Scandinavian country, which is Sweden. Why? What exactly happening with India's score? India's position in the case of the transition index is only 87. Whereas in the case of trilemma index, we are somewhere close to say 75. It is a long way to head. So we are bringing these discussions in these 3 days to bring this particular aspect to the thing. So yes, we have our beloved or respected Professor Benjamin Sovacool, who will take us to the whole journey of energy transition and the importance of focusing it. Thank you very much, sir, for sparing your day with us, and we really appreciate and looking forward to listen to you. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. I wish I was in India. It's rainy and dreary today here in London, but it's a pleasure. So today I'm going to talk to you about kind of a very big picture of global trends in energy transitions, or actually low carbon transitions, because some of them are dealing with other things like heat and mobility. And I'm really going to focus in, as requested, on bottlenecks, so kind of barriers and kind of negative evidence, and boosters, notions of acceleration and fast transitions. So I wanted to start by kind of a provocative question using very recent data. So I was just grabbing these from the International Energy Agency a few days ago. It's very easy to look at really nice graphs like this. This is from the IEA's net zero report. And to be convinced that, of course, we are in the midst of very rapid transformative energy transitions. Look at the growth in the left axis in terms of how much wind and solar we're adding. And this would have been close to 2 gigawatts in 2010. So it goes from 2 to 200, from 200 to 1,000, a terawatt within our lifetimes. This is within the next 8 years. And look at the number of EV sales, which are jumping. I like this number because it's a little bit hard to see in this graph. We had about 1 million EVs on the road in 2015. We're expected to have 1 billion by 2050. So a growth from 1 million to 1,000 million in 4 decades. And we're continuing to see massive improvements in energy efficiency across the economy. Things like residential appliance standards and building codes, things like industrial energy audits and new manufacturing systems and fuel switching and advanced manufacturing, automation, digitalization are saving massive amounts of energy, 4% per year. We're using less energy in our economies to produce widgets and other things that we need. And I mentioned the EV numbers a little bit earlier. A way I like this graph is it shows that EV growth is not just China. So you can see China is there in the bottom blue, but it's not just China. And what I like about this graph is what it implies. And it implies it took us 20 years to reach the first million EVs being deployed around 2015. It then took us only a year to see the second million and 8 months for the third million. And now we're seeing 1 million EVs added every 3 weeks. So you talk about acceleration, right? There it is in battery electric vehicle data parsed out from the International Energy Agency. And finally, something much closer to India and I think South Asia's energy security needs are projections about energy access. Because as we know, energy poverty is a very stark problem for India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, even the Maldives, where people lack access to electricity networks and they lack access to modern forms of cooking. And you can see here, look at this, according to the IEA's projections to net zero, it's possible by 2030 to achieve universal energy access. We will have no homes anywhere in the world that lack access to a mix of grid energy or renewables or microgrids or mini grids or standalone systems like solar home systems and pico hydro and biogas digesters. What a wonderful world that would be, where we take the 800 million people who currently lack access and get them access, which again is a massive transition in our lifetime. So already you're kind of setting the stage that, well, of course, we see these transitions. And we also see them in new designs of technology. So this actually shows you in the most recent International Energy Agency report, expected future technologies, technologies that we don't even know about yet, large prototype technologies like direct air capture, or demonstration technologies like BECCS, bioenergy with carbon capture, or enhanced weathering, or early adoption technologies like thin film solar photovoltaics. It is these new technologies that are expected to achieve the majority of our emissions reductions by 2055, 2060, 2070. Mature technologies, technologies that we have on the market today, wind turbines, household solar, existing plug-in hybrids, are only going to achieve 26% of our emissions reduction. So there's another built-in assumption that we will be transforming our innovation platforms to deliver new energy systems, again, within our lifetime. And with that, we hope will be substantial changes in practices as well. Things like drying our laundry outside rather than with a tumble dryer. Things like ride sharing, things like cycling, things like working from home, things like flying less. Behavioral transitions can also save, as you can see here, up to 2 gigatons of carbon by 2020, 2030, I mean. So there's the good case. Here's the bad case. Are these actually energy transitions, or are they merely energy additions? If you take an even bigger picture and you go all the way back, you can see here on the left, Richard and Shannon have plotted data for the United States. And on the right is data taken from Vaclav Smil and the BP Statistical Review of Energy. We're not using less fossil fuels. In fact, this last year was the greatest single increase in fossil fuel use, period, largely because of recovery from COVID. So again, according to this picture, we're not seeing anything change. All that we're twiddling around with are these top elements of the graph on the right. We're just adding on a little bit of solar, a little bit of wind, when the bulk of our energy system is still gas, oil, and coal. It is still very carbon intensive, especially in places like transportation, industry, freight, and aviation. So, are we having a transition or not? And I think part of this debate really matters on how well you define a transition. So to talk about Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, he used to say, he who controls the definition controls the debate. So how you define an energy transition will shape whether you think it's happening fastly or slowly and what your unit of analysis is. And in the literature, maybe unsurprisingly, there's no consensus over what a transition is. So the classic definition, the one that you've probably heard, the one that I think Hippu and Hari probably would guess, it's a change in fuel. It's a change in technology. It's changing security of supply, SOS. Gas substitution for coal, nuclear inefficiency for maybe gas. It's the conversion of maybe steamships, right, to from sail ships, submarines, right, rather than steamships. So you're changing the fundamental fuel sources behind a national energy supply. And we've seen lots of this already, right, around the world. But it's not the only way that you can typify a transition. What about changing the technologies that use those energy services? What about things like prime movers? These are like combined cycle gas turbines or internal combustion engines. Or what about end use devices, smart meters, laptop computers, televisions, refrigerators, air conditioners? You can keep national fuel supply the same and just dramatically change and accelerate how we're using that energy on the demand side. And then, as if this wasn't enough, you also have transitions in regulatory systems, in economies that may not do anything about fuel or end use devices, but will change the regulations and the market structures behind energy. Those of you that have been studying energy for a few decades know that electricity systems are in the middle of a massive shift from monopoly regulated markets to privatized, restructured, and liberalized markets. So whether your electricity markets are restructured and unbundled, right? Distribution assets are owned by one entity, transmission and generation assets are owned by another entity, right? And you have market competition. This is what the World Bank has been pushing for the past few decades. So you can simply change how energy is provided and regulated. And a good example here is the very rapid energy transition Cuba had that had nothing to do with technology and everything to do with markets. They were completely dependent on the Soviet Union for fuel subsidies and energy aid. And that stopped in 1990. And they had to do a massive rapid shift in 1 year away from Soviet oil and gas. So again, you can have shifts in economics and aid that are just as salient as technology and devices. And then finally, you have a whole school of evidence from a different set of disciplines that you might be less familiar with. Innovation studies, behavioral psychology, and sociology that talk about diffusion. How long does it take a new technology to diffuse across a market? With Everett Rogers and his theory of diffusion, which talks about early adopters and late adopters and laggards, and how these times can take anywhere from 5 years to 10 years, right, until you saturate the market. Confusingly, you can also look at fuels and technologies and economics and diffusion times at any scale. At the scale of a household, at the scale of a university, at the scale of a state, at the scale of a country like India, a region like South Asia, a broader region, the Asia Pacific, or the globe. So again, your scale can also affect how fast or slow you think a transition might be coming from. In our work, we've tended to take a very holistic view of energy transitions, which is all of the above. We will look at transitions at any scale involving any of these 4 important dimensions. And there are some very helpful heuristics or theories that have emerged in the literature about how transitions happen. I quite like the work of Arnof Grubler and Charlie Wilson, who talk about, they should have named it, a spatial temporal theory of transitions. So the spatial elements are that an innovation emerges and you experiment with it and you learn. And then once you work out the kinks, you scale up to unit scaling, and then you scale up again to industry scaling, and then you go to standardization across markets, and then you eventually reach saturation. And this temporal aspect also happens across space. So it happens in a core where the invention emerged, like Watt's steam engine, and then it emerges out to the rim, places like at the time, Scotland and Wales, and finally to the periphery, places like Portugal, Italy, and Sweden, if you're talking about the steam engine. And when you take an approach of transitions like this, look at how long they actually take on the right. Even though the steam engine and coal had so many benefits over animate power and human power, it still took upwards of 160 years for it to diffuse in England alone, and then another century or so to diffuse throughout the rest of Europe. You can also see how long it took then, after that, the phase in of oil, crude oil, natural gas, and electricity, which also took half a century or more to 3/4 of a century more. And again, that's despite crude oil and electricity having lots of advantages over solid coal. You also see in the history of technology, scholars like Thomas Park Hughes looking at large technical systems, LTS, and showing us how these also emerge and grow very slowly. The communications grids, and the electric utility networks behind modern society took centuries to evolve. And as Hughes even said, they even went through phases, again, that take a long time: invention, expansion, growth, momentum, where they then diverge into style, and then we've built on Hughes, and they get reconfigured by different crises. And they can even lead to stagnation and decline, like rail in France or street trolleys in the United States, or currently coal in the UK, which is in a state of decline. And again, we've mapped these underlying trends and transitions across many different sectors, not just energy, electricity, railways, gas pipelines, sewage systems, manufacturing systems, shale gas, telecoms, flood control, and streetcars and railways, again. And finally, not to bore you too much, we did a study 5 years ago where we actually interviewed prominent academic theorists and asked them, well, how many conceptual frameworks are there if we want to understand energy transitions, or if you want a better term, a more vernacular term for academic speak, socio-technical change, which is the same thing, people changing their constellation of artifacts and behaviors and practices. We interviewed 35 theorists, and they gave us a whopping 96 different theories. So we have almost 100 different tools in the academy that try to explain in some way a transition from a variety of disciplines: behavioral science, STS, innovation studies, sociology, economics, and a whole basket of others like geography and business and development, and even legal studies and ethics. And if you really want to delve into theories, you can read the article. I'm not going to talk about it more. We have a long list of all 96 theories where we organize them by discipline, their name, their key authors, and how they apply to the topic of transitions. You can also read the article for the short list of theories, where we took the top 14 theories that were mentioned the most by the expert respondents. This is kind of a hot list of popular theories as of 5 years ago that our experts said were the most important and most salient. And again, you can see here, even these 14 theories are very, very different. The multi-level perspective on transitions is about niches, regimes, and landscapes. Social practice theory is about the way that we put energy services to use for practices. It's about materialities, meanings, and competencies and skills. Discourse theory is about language and hegemony and power. Domestication theory is about learning to use a new technology in the home. Actor network theory is about assemblages. Value belief norm theory are about values and norms. UTOT is about perceived behavioral control. So each of these theories has very different building blocks that understand these transitions in very different ways. But moving away from concepts, which are kind of a quagmire, what about the evidence about these transitions historically and empirically? So on the one hand, as I already mentioned, you have the data from Grubler and Wilson that says these transitions take a very long time, and that has provoked some, like the eminent geographer and historian Vaclav Smil, to say energy transitions have been and will continue to be inherently prolonged affairs that make it impossible, not difficult, impossible to accelerate their progress, even if we resort to highly effective interventions like a carbon tax. Smil says that energy transitions are an intergenerational challenge, a challenge for the next few generations of engineers, not just the current category of engineering today. And Smil has these beautiful graphs like this top one, which shows you how long it took coal, oil, and gas to achieve just 5% of total primary energy supply. The top one shows the timeline. The bottom one is the same data replotted, so it's easier to see. So you can see it took coal almost 90 years to achieve a 5% share of total primary energy supply, and then another 30 years or so to reach 118, to reach 25%. Oil took 80 years, natural gas took 88. Nuclear and wind haven't even cracked the 25% total primary energy supply scale, because this is energy, not just electricity. And if you look at different data from Grubler and Wilson and another innovation scholar, Gregory Nemeth, they've taken a number of different diffusion rates for technologies. So on the left, you see formative phases. These are the kind of RD and D phases. How long did it take this innovation to emerge, to be perfected, put in a lab, and then piloted? And on the right is after it was piloted, how long did it take to achieve market saturation? So the left one is kind of invention, and the right one is then market saturation. So to get the true rate of diffusion, you add them up together, and you can already see, look how long the formative phases were for steamships and steam engines and e-bikes and wind power. And on the right, you can then see even after they were perfected, how long did it take them to get developed and marketed and sold to consumers? And it gets even worse because these formative phases and diffusion phases are only for individual technologies. It takes even longer, according to Grubler, Wilson, and Nemeth, to do systems of systems transitions. This is, it's not just a single technology like a gas turbine. It's an entire socio-technical system like an electricity grid. Those are magnitudes of order more difficult to transition because there's so many moving parts. And for an electricity system, you're talking about horizontal and vertically integrated parts of that utility system: coal mines, rail yards, power plants, fly ash facilities, right? As well as things like pollution abatement, financing, and regulations. All of that has to shift together in a coordinated way. And my colleagues, Bruno and Frank, have looked at the flip side of transitions the other way, not how long does it take to phase something in, but how long does it take to phase it out? And here you can see how long it's taken coal to be phased out of the UK, even though British regulators recognized in the 1950s with a really bad air pollution and smog crisis in London. They've recognized that coal needed to be phased out since then. And even though Margaret Thatcher famously took on the coal unions in the 70s, despite all of that, it's taken coal more than a century to see its decline. Look at all of the punctuated equilibria, all of the ups and downs, and the fact that even at the end of last century, coal was still alive. And even today in 2022, they're talking about opening new coal mines in Wales to meet domestic energy needs and now to diversify away from Russia. So again, you look at the flip side of transitions and it takes an equally long time to phase something out. However, there are some peculiarities in the evidence. At what percentage would you say a transition occurs, right? Smill had said 5% and 25%. Others say 10%. Grubler and Wilson said 50%. So again, there's not precise numbers. And why are they round numbers? Why isn't it 4.99865%? As I mentioned earlier, systems of systems are maybe a different lens. So rather than looking at one isolated technology, you can look at coupling of technologies and how they co-evolve. And I'll give you two examples here. Early battery electric vehicles and internal combustion cars competed with each other in the 1900s. And one of the reasons the internal combustion car won and was victorious is it cannibalized and mimicked many of the innovations. It stole them from EVs. So things like pneumatic tires, electric starters, batteries, larger boot spaces, and push button starters. All of that came from EVs, and they were incorporated into things like the Model T. So is it really fair to say that the EVs died when they were actually just mimicked and incorporated into the successful internal combustion car? Another example here are couplings of things like railways and telegraphs, right? Because as you were laying rail, you also had the same labor to lay telegraphs and also use the same rights of way. And also the railways used the telegraphs for communication at the time. So they were coupled. Same with oil and roads. As gasoline got more refined, it stimulated greater demand for mobility, which meant for more cars. And the more cars there were, the more roads you needed. The more roads you needed, the more you needed oil. So you see a positive synergetic relationship with oil, pipelines, and roads as well. And finally, the unit of analysis. Those graphs that Smill showed that take like 80, 90, 120 years for fossil fuels to reach 25% share look slow. But if you zoom in on smaller discrete changes within those transitions, like the uptake of internal combustion engines or steam engines or oil heating or oil lamps, some of those transitions were occurring at 100% diffusion rates per year, 100%, 200% growth. So they're fast when you zoom in, but slow when you zoom out. So we've done some work to kind of challenge the evidence about transitions. So we've looked at 4 very fast transitions in terms of energy end use and demand and prime movers. And we've looked at 4 very fast transitions in terms of security of supply. And we've looked at these around the world. So you can see in terms of end use devices, it's things like energy efficient lights in Sweden and cook stoves in China and LPG stoves, in Indonesia, and flex fuel vehicles in Brazil. These are vehicles that can run on ethanol and petrol, or the uptake of air conditioning in the US. And if you're talking national transitions, Kuwait's shift to crude oil and electricity, the Dutch dash for gas, the French nuclear rollout, Denmark's push for CHP, which is even faster than their wind energy push. And then we looked at one inverse, the phase out of coal in a province in Canada, Ontario. Look at these diffusion rates. The number of years these transitions took to reach 25% ranges from 1 year to 16 years. These are very rapid transitions. And look at the right. If you add up the size of people who were affected by these transitions, it's massive. It's 950 million. Almost 1 billion people have been affected by some sort of rapid energy transition in our lifetime. So it really starts to cast some doubt that transitions are always slow and that transitions are always prolonged affairs. And many of these are occurring in developing countries, China, Indonesia. And many of them are also on the demand side rather than the supply side. And we've kind of replicated this study very recently. This is from last year, where we looked at low carbon heating transitions, which again, heat is often an area that's hard to decarbonize. And we've looked at transitions that were not only rapid, but also deep at affecting lots of consumers. And you see another 310 million people in just 4 cases who have seen their heating changed within our generation, whether it's solar thermal in China or heat pumps in Finland, or the switch from town gas to natural gas from the North Sea for the UK. So again, if you look for it, there is ample evidence of accelerated transitions in areas that are difficult, like mobility, flex fuel vehicles, cooking, and heating. And if you also, by my colleague Florian and Carolyn, have a really nice piece that also says, look, history is changing. The fundamental drivers behind transitions, the underlying dynamics are altering. Historic energy transitions, those ones that Smil were talking about, haven't been always consciously governed. They're kind of accidental transitions. They happened because of resource discoveries or crises or wars, OPEC embargo. Whereas today, we can actually design transitions. We have research to build on, and we can actively govern transitions. And we have a whole plan in the UK towards net zero. And we have the NDCs that are part of the Paris Accord. So the second thing that they talk about is also how innovation dynamics can accelerate transitions in unexpected ways. And they give one example here. Their example is the German feed-in tariff catalyzing Chinese manufacturing for solar energy that accelerates global adoption of solar photovoltaics in ways that even the Germans didn't anticipate. In fact, it actually backfired and hurt German industrial strategy. And finally, they were at that time quite confident that the Paris Agreement was at least now a global commitment. By global, I mean almost all countries, like the US withdrew and rejoined, like Syria and Russia and Saudi Arabia had doubts, but like the rest of the globe, India, China, the BRICS, Europe, Canada, Mexico, were all on board for the first time with a real norm of trying to meet nationally determined contributions for climate mitigation. Moreover, helping counter the evidence from Turnheim and Keels that the flip side of transitions takes a long time, Carolyn, Florian, and Paula have said we also have new instruments that can accelerate phase out by doing different technology controls and changing market rules and reducing support and ensuring better consideration of energy efficiency and renewables and all of that. So we also have kind of new arrows in our quiver on the road to the decarbonization war that we can use that we didn't even have 10 years ago. Moratoriums and bans on incandescent light bulbs, bans on conventional cars. Paris, Berlin, London, and 40 other cities now have active bans on conventional cars by 2035 or 2040 or 2045. So again, we're starting to phase things out in a much more rapid way that won't take us a century. It will take us 5 years or 10 years or 25 years. And this also goes in line with changes in demand. So there used to be a classic debate, I'm sure Harry and Hippu remember it, about peak oil, peak coal. Will we see a peak in supply? And there's that old quip that the Stone Age didn't end for lack of stone, and the oil age won't end for lack of oil. And so we even have banks like Citi. Citi Research is the research arm of Citibank, talking about how they're predicting, because of shale gas, a peak in oil demand. Forget about supply. Oil's end is here. The end is nigh because of cheap gas, because we're able to do vehicle efficiency gains and gas substitution on the bottom that will see oil use plateau and then decline as we see gas penetrate shipping, trucking, power, petrochemicals, and other sectors of the economy. And to illustrate these rapid shifts, I want to share with you a few slides that are not my own. These come from the Global Intelligent Network Utility Coalition. This is a coalition run by IBM, and it's a coalition that has some very, very big utilities. You can see Tata Power is a member, as well as TEPCO and E.ON and Dong, although they now call it Ørsted, Duke Energy, etc. These are utilities that supply hundreds of millions of customers a year. And I got to attend one of their confidential seminars a few years ago to see what they thought about the transition. And it's amazing. For them, the debate about the energy transition is not academic. It is here and happening right now. Their markets are being disrupted. Look at here. This was from one of their slides. You can see multiple disruptive trends: solar, storage, EVs, distributed generation, smart meters, and how they are extremely challenging their business models. And you can see here, you know, it's a utility slide when they call solar energy grid defection. Customers are defecting from the grid, which is their perspective. And many of these different utilities are so concerned about the disruption to their business models that they're even offering slides like this that are kind of saying in 2030 and 2040, we may not even sell energy anymore. We will be out of the market of kilowatt hours or decatherms or cubic meters of gas. Instead, we might just sell technology. Instead, maybe we can do data analysis. Maybe we can be banks. Yes, the utilities are talking about financing and bonds, and maybe better valuation and market analytics for the energy sector. They'll become consulting firms like McKinsey. So how shocking that utilities like TEPCO are envisioning that in 10 years' time, they may not even sell energy anymore, or at least energy may not be the most promising aspect of their market. And finally, and this is the last slide from the Global Utility Commission, they showed us this, and this was in 2015. 2015 in Houston, Texas. These were the 67 different apps and companies that were trying to make energy use and home energy applications smarter. Many of which deal with energy, lighting, energy, utilities, automation, and device controllers, and some of which don't, pet monitors, safety and security, but those things do consume energy. And those of us that are my age remember in 1994 and 1995, when the World Wide Web and Netscape was just emerging, we never probably would have imagined in 20 years' time that we would have devices like this smartphone in our hands that were smart and could connect to the internet and control things in our home. It would have seemed futuristic. And again, that's just a shift that's happened in 2 decades of time. Interestingly, we were so inspired by this study about the 67 apps in Houston, we replicated it. So we replicated this here in London 2 years ago, where we did 37 site visits to a variety of different appliance homes and shops. And we also did 31 expert interviews with smart tech providers. So we interviewed Google and Microsoft and Apple and others, and found today, or at least in 2020, it was 67 in Texas in 2015. Today in 2020, it's 267 apps. 267 new apps are available to make homes smarter, involving more than 50 of the top Fortune 500 firms around the world and a potential market value in the trillions of dollars. right? And these are major companies: Amazon, Google, Dyson, Yamaha, Apple, Nike. And again, many of these new devices, lighting, entertainment, gas and utilities, integrated solutions, are intimately affecting how we use energy in domestic spaces. So again, rapid changes in how we can control, visualize, and imagine energy use within our lifetimes. So what does this mean? So I can open it up for questions, which I'm sure that you have. I think the first one goes back to my quip about Aristotle. Whether an energy transition is fast or slow will depend on how it is defined. Are you talking about security of supply, changes in end-use devices, changes in prime movers? Are you talking about diffusion speeds, changes in markets? So anytime someone talks about a transition, always check the assumptions: energy or electricity, total primary energy supply, total final energy demand. And always think about what assumptions they're using. At what percentage did they say a transition occurred? Did they consider multi-transitions, multi-technology transitions, and coupling, and systems of systems, and so on? Keep in mind too, from the beginning of my presentation, how we have an arsenal of conceptual tools, 96, almost 100 different theories and concepts and frameworks that try to understand transitions. But in a way, this is also its own quagmire. On the one hand, maybe it implies the academy doesn't know what they're talking about. If we need 96 theories to understand a phenomena, maybe that means that they exist because no single one dominates. There's no one, like Darwin's theory of evolution. We haven't achieved a master theory yet. We just have piecemeal theories, but no synthesis or unification. So maybe it means that there are 96 theories because none of them resonate and none of them have done a good job yet. Or is this a celebration? Is this something that we should applaud because it implies the true breadth of intellectual scholarship that everyone in the academy, from behavioral science and anthropology all the way to things like science, technology studies, and history, are all trying to understand transitions in their own way? And maybe if it's true that there are 100 ways to enjoy a film, and 100 ways to enjoy a piece of art, and 100 ways, right, talk about what best restaurant is in Delhi, then maybe it's okay that we have 100 ways to think about transitions. That's just normal, and that just reflects reality and differing perspectives. My own take is a more generous middle ground of all of them are useful. All of those 96 theories are good at explaining something, but they also miss something else. So something is in focus with each of them, but that means something is out of focus. So there is no master theory of transitions, although whether they're useful and have efficacy will depend on your research question and your unit of analysis. And finally, you can read that short list of theories a bit differently. If you're looking for the two academic theories that are currently deemed the most relevant, it's the multi-level perspective on transitions and it's social practice theory. So you could say if you're designing your own research, you should use those theories right now because everyone knows what they are. And I'm getting an article a day submitted to the journal I edit that uses these theories. So they're very currently popular. Or you could say, you know what, I don't like what's popular. I don't want to do what everyone else is doing. And you won't use those theories because they're overused, and you can use some of the other theories that are fresh. So it kind of depends on how you read the evidence. But clearly, existing scholarship has a proclivity to use the multi-level perspective and social practice theory. The causes now, turning to the empirical part of the presentation, of these fast transitions are complex. If you talk about the 10 fast transitions that I showed you, the ones that affected 950 million people, some of them are caused by world wars. So France, its nuclear rollout begins with Charles de Gaulle in the 1940s to try to radiate and recover and show that France could be good at something again in the devastation of World War II and occupied, when Germany occupied France. And Kuwait was only able to explore their oil and gas fields to create electricity because of the cessation of conflict. Kuwait and those oil fields were a battleground during the war. The war ends, now they can start to peacefully co-develop their infrastructure. There was a very troubling rural famine behind the cook stoves program in China, and the OPEC oil embargo was the single catalyst for both Denmark's push for wind power and heat and power, and Brazil's launch of the pro-alcohol program in 1974, which then is a precursor to their flex fuel program. Only one of our transitions was demand-driven. That was air conditioning in the United States. So again, these causes, each of the transitions, like Vaclav Smilus said, is like an airplane crash. It's like a unique constellation of factors and dynamics lets it play out very differently in each of the locations. But future transitions might be different. Future transitions can now be actively governed. And we have all of these new tools like phase-out policies. Maybe they're driven by scarcity rather than abundance and new resource discoveries. And maybe they're driven by demand pressures rather than changes in supply, including pandemics or conflict and war like Ukraine, Russia. All of these can drive transitions in unexpected ways that we don't anticipate. And I think for me, the bottom line is that we can learn from the past, but it doesn't have to be prologue. History is instructive, but it doesn't necessarily have to be predictive precisely because we can learn from it. So maybe there is hope that future transitions can be accelerated and can occur in meaningful ways that we haven't anticipated and never expected. And with that, I'm very happy to open it up for questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Professor Benjamin. Those like need to mention this like overwhelming, impressive figures. Those are coming in, which shows a lot of positive movement that is informative. Definitely at one point of time, a lot of encouragement and motivation. Yeah, those that sets us thinking whether it's the pull or the push, which is pushing us towards that. That need of looking energy into some other way around. Things from where you have ended need not to be closed like this. It needs more brainstorming definitely here. So rather than me, conveying my thanks, I would like to take the privilege of bringing or calling in Dr. Hippo Salk to as a discussant to let us just try to unravel what Professor Benjamin has said. For the audience, Dr. Hippo Salk Krishnanathan is an engineer turned development researcher with an MTech from the IIT Delhi and PhD from IGITR Mumbai. He has won the Elsevier National Academy of Sciences India Award, NASI Scopus Young Scientist Award in 2017 in Social Sciences. He was Subit Chaudhary Postdoctoral Fellow at the LC for 2016-17. Currently, Professor Hippo is working as an associate professor at IRMA in Anand. He teaches and his research area is in the area of development theory, energy for sustainable development, public policy, and measuring development. Prior to joining IRMA, Professor Hippo was working with NIIS Bangalore. He had industry experience with Infosys Limited, Bangalore, and Geometric Global Mumbai. So as a part of civil society intervention through People's Foundation for Scientific Socio-Economic Development, Professor Hippo has been involved in education, in health, and in livelihood issues also. So his research interest lies in economic measurement, energy, sustainable uses of resources, human development, and disarmament. Most significant research contribution lies in conceptualized and developed frameworks for both structuring and selection of sustainable development indicators. Professor Hippo, I think I would request you to carry on with the discussions that Professor Benjamin has triggered, in fact. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Stavani, for this kind and generous introduction. And I must thank profusely Professor Benjamin Sovacool. I had the opportunity of meeting in, if he remembers, in September 2019, and he was kind enough, though his son was not well. I clearly remember the day I was trying to meet him, but he could find time for me. And of course, subsequently, when I invited for this conference, he also kindly agreed to give his research. What Shravani has requested something, which requires a lot of expertise to summarize Professor Benjamin's talk. The day I met him, I saw him energetic, very, very productive and very hardworking. And that's how he continues, and he remains young. And that's what I said. Looking at his work, I always felt that I'm going to meet an old man, but that was not to be so. And today also seeing you, Professor Benjamin, with such young, energetic, and the kind of work which you have shown, it's always an inspiration for all the energy researchers around the world. So yeah, I mean, just of course, Professor Benjamin had kind of summarized the work. I mean, the way, of course, Professor Benjamin brought this transition. I mean, he went across the spectrum, in the sense from the theories to the practice, from the transitions which were extremely slow to the transitions which are very fast. I mean, that actually brings in a lot of research questions, that why certain transitions succeed and why certain transition doesn't succeed. I mean, of course, when we read Roger's theory of diffusion of a technology, we know there will be some societies, some individuals who will be always innovators, early adopters, whereas some would be laggards. And in that sense, which are the countries maybe, or which are the regions of the world which are still the laggards? In the sense, in one of our papers which I worked with Dr. Hari, was when we are looking at energy poverty in India, and when we are looking at the household, how a household make the transition. I mean, what Professor Sovacool spoke about, the transition with the society as a macro sense is making, but then an individual or a household, when it makes the transition, and we are trying to find out between the rural and the urban areas, and we did find in the rural areas the transition is not happening, in the sense because the households need that security, need that they wanted to diversify their portfolio of energy basket, so that they can fall back to something inferior when the superior supply options no more exist. Therefore, the characteristics which we call are the energy stacking characteristics that happens in the third world, in particularly in India. Even if you go to the richest of the households in rural areas in India, you would see firewood stacked up in the veranda of those households as well. I mean, so the transition is of that kind, where you adopt a new technology, you adopt a new fuel, but you don't abandon the earlier fuel or the earlier technology. I mean, this is something which the transition story, which is always interesting, which is always, I mean, as Professor Sovacool has also highlighted, it's a multidisciplinary study. A lot of, many technologies are very good, there is no doubt about it. But then when you talk about, as far as the user friendliness is concerned, I mean, that's where they typically fail. I mean, these are, I mean, like, for example, one example in Indian context, which Professor Sovacool must be aware, is about our solar cookers. So we used to have box type solar cookers, popularized in the 80s and the early 90s, but never could take off, because it is extremely inconvenient for the lady of the house who is typically involved in the cooking, to have part of the cooking outside and then bringing the vessel inside, and then doing so basically you have to tune to the timing of the sun, which is extremely inconvenient. And that's exactly the reason, though solar is a very tested technology, that is exactly the reason the solar box type cooker could never take off. It always what we call it actually had a death in the technology, valley of death. Okay, so though it was supported, you did mention about market penetration. You also mentioned about the kind of support what the systems of the institutions provide to the technology. Though there are certain technology, like for example in our case also biogas also had the same fate. Whereas some other technologies like PV and maybe technologies like for example wind, which actually had the shortest, the way you were saying, the quickest transition that happened in those technologies. Yes, I mean, this is transition story is always very interesting. I mean, you have to look at both, as again Professor Benjamin Sovacool's talk is about looking at both the supply as well as the demand side. It's not just one side story. It is also about the regulation. I mean, most of the solar PVs which have failed also in India are because of the supply side issues in terms of the supply chain issues. I mean, once the technology failed, when one of the components of this solar system failed, that actually people are clueless, how to get those maybe distilled water to recharge the batteries, or when the batteries goes out of order, how to mend the batteries. Though the panel would last for 20-25 years, but there are other components which can fail. I mean, this is also in some cases, and whatever limited field experiences I have, it has created a kind of graveyard of technologies. So, I mean, this, of course, I mean, whosoever has listened to this talk, I mean, I sincerely encourage them to follow Professor Sovacool's extensive work. I mean, he would, of course, the Energy Research and Social Science Journal, which he leads, and of course, the network he leads. So, which is a very good platform for various opportunities. We are always grateful to you for leading that front and helping us with a lot of opportunities and a lot of key research ideas. Thank you very much, and over to Shravani to take any questions if an audience have questions for Professor Benjamin Sovacool. And thanks again, Professor Sovacool, for this interesting talk.
Thank you so much, Professor Shipul. And audience, regarding questions, can please direct it to me so that I can address to Professor Benjamin.
It's okay if I've shocked them into silence. While we wait for people to raise hands, I just wanted to reply to Hippu. Great comments, and I think a lot of it too implies, there isn't enough work on Indian energy transitions that take into account local Indian culture. Because even solar cookers, right? They've worked in some places of Africa, right? But it's just in India they never took off. In Africa, they were able to experience the inconvenience, or they saw other benefits. Maybe being outside meant they could talk to their friends, and it's probably more sunny in certain parts of the Sahel than it is in parts of India. So it's like, again, the kind of cultural dynamics of these things are very interesting. And I think there is a bit of a problem of, I can do as much work as I can from Sussex, but I'm in the UK. I don't know India that well. And so I think there's certainly a lot of scope for bottom-up good Indian work that really understands both historical Indian transitions, but also future-wise, right? India is unique. I remember I had a colleague from Singapore who was of Indian descent, and we visited India back in 2015, and she was just like, India reminds me of like 1950s Singapore. It was like, in her mind, it was like 40 years behind where most of the other countries in Southeast Asia were. And I think that India is unlike almost any other country in the region because you have such a need for energy security and energy equity. And I think that I would love nothing more than to see that led by Indian researchers. It doesn't have to be us foreigners swooping in to collect data and going out. And we've done some projects with Terry. We looked at the Village Energy Security Program, which was a total village energy security. It was biogas and solar to try to provide not only heat and electricity, but also even mobility fuel. And it collapsed. It collapsed because it relied too much on village leaders. And as kind of Hippu said, culturally, people decided they wanted to use biomass for other things. They could make more money selling it for other areas rather than as a fuel to be used by themselves. And so something like half of the village energy security projects were not working 2 years after the project had finished. And it was a multi-province project. So I think we need more work like that. And I think it's time, if you can find the work that provides explanatory power to India's energy poverty challenges, you could literally help millions of people in ways that I can't. So there's the challenge, Hippu.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Shravani, if you have received some questions.
Professor, there is one question which I directly like to address Professor Benjamin and Professor Hippu together. Is that is from the Indian scenario, which the a guest is actually asking, is that regarding the solar part that has been raised, is that the cost which is holding it back in the Indian scenario, and the kind of an awareness that in these two are lacking, then how to work upon on that? Because I think the question arises somewhere that is going in my mind, the kind of an data that has been displayed by Professor Benjamin. So how to address that? The question I think relates to this. Yeah.
Am I going first, Sipu? You want to go
Sure,
first?
sure. Please go.
Okay, so solar energy was not one of the, if you look through my slides, solar energy was actually not mentioned because it's a much newer transition. And we were doing a lot of this work in 2013 and 2014, 2015. But we have done some work before on the uptake of off-grid solar and microgrid solar in places like India, but also places like Bangladesh and Nepal and Sri Lanka. So we're talking South Asia now, not just India. And there, I think, yeah, you have a variety of aspects that make solar very difficult outside of urban areas. So I think in places like New Delhi, right, and Chennai and kind of major cultural centers of India, it's okay. You've got the business models and supply chains and knowledge and awareness. But when you go to the really poor rural areas that we would say are chronically poor, areas that are illiterate, areas that have no financial capacity, areas that aren't going to get a loan from a bank, and areas that don't have any energy access. We met people in Nepal who had never seen a light bulb before, a light bulb. And we met other people who had never had a cold beer before because they've never had refrigeration ever. They've never seen Netflix. They've never had a mobile phone, right? So it's like in those areas of extreme poverty, they don't know anything about solar. Or if they do, there's a huge amount of misinformation. Like they think that one solar panel can power the whole village. Or that they can have one solar panel and it's enough for refrigeration and entertainment and pumping and this and that. So they don't know anything about it. And they get very frustrated that it doesn't do what they thought it would do. So I do think there's a huge awareness issue and there's a huge financial capacity issue of how you reach these people at the bottom of the pyramid that will not be reached by businesses.
Yeah, so if I just may add by giving one anecdote from the field, where I had gone to one of the remote.
One more question in the line. Mask.
Sorry, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah, okay.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, sir.
So yes, so I just want to add to what Professor Benjamin said by giving one field anecdote where we had gone to a particular village which is just beside the highway, and then that village was not electrified, and therefore they had getting electricity from a village level microgrid, and there was panels which were stolen in that village, and that because of the panels being stolen, the villagers, I mean, you see the level of awareness which Professor Benjamin was indicating that somebody not had seen a light bulb, etc. So solar PV. So what they did was, since out of the 30 panels they had in the microgrid system, 8 were stolen. They thought there are 22 panels still left, and if it will be left together, it will be stolen again. So what they did is each of them got one of the panels to their respective houses. There are 20 odd households in that village, and then they were using that as a simple whatever, as some plain surface for doing various things. So the idea is that something which is one thing, of course, is there. I mean, like we call in energy, there is the kerosene subsidy. I mean, I just want to bring this to tell you a classic case of public policy failure. The kerosene subsidy in India was introduced, whether you know or not. It's to kerosene to be used as a clean cooking fuel. But if you look at the data, you would find less than 1% village households used to use kerosene as their main cooking fuel. So why it was happening? Because one end, it was assumed that the firewood is available in freely, I mean, which is of course the women and the girls of the household who do the bulk of the work. Therefore, the patriarch family would not think that it's a hard work. And secondly, the electrification was slow. So one end you have for cooking, you have firewood, which is seemingly freely available, and the other end the electrification is slow. Therefore, kerosene actually was used primarily for a lighting fuel, and 50% of it, I mean, there are several documents which says 45% of it at least actually adulterated as cheap transportation fuel, and it's basically one end kerosene used as a lighting fuel, adding to the indoor air pollution which anyway the fire would produce, and also kerosene being adulterated in tractors and other vehicles with the petroleum fuel also is creating the local air pollution. So coming to the exact question what you asked, I mean, of course, the cost of course, you asked about the cost of the solar. Cost of the solar is falling drastically. What used to be the relative cost of the panel is that relative cost of the panel compared to the balance of the system, the battery and the rest of it, is actually the ratio has fallen. But still the battery is costly, and something which is off grid is slightly difficult to manage, because though the panel actually, as I have said, panel actually lasts for 20-25 years, but the rest of the components might get its life in 5 years, 10 years, like that. And then if the place is not, as Professor Benjamin was mentioning, the place is not well connected, then obviously it would not have the supply chain to give you the repair, and you don't have the human resource to handle it. One organization which has hugely succeeded in providing off-grid solar systems in India is Selco, and they succeeded primarily because they have a thumb rule. They don't give a solar system to any rural areas unless they have a repair person available within certain kilometers of their operation. So they will only go to an area where they have repair people available, or they have trained people to take care of the system. So this is something, again, the technology transition can happen because of the transition happen when there is availability of the human resources. So which actually goes along with the transition. So this is a case where transition failed because of the unavailability of the human resources or unavailability of the technology spare parts or repairing. So yes, so I think, given this, this is something which we also have to ask ourselves as urbanites. So whenever we use our energy resources, or the energy services, we actually don't bother about what kind of, like for example, I am using electricity in my office now. I don't know where the electricity is coming from, whether it is coming from solar, nuclear, hydro, or coal. Okay, so we have to treat the rural consumers similarly, in the sense we don't have to burden them with a lot of responsibilities in managing, producing the energy. That is one. Of course, this way I'm basically talking. You might feel that I'm talking against decentralization. I'm not actually. I'm talking about something like some kind of decentralization which is centralized, in the sense some of these bottom level responsibilities, if you, for example, if you have those responsibilities given at a slightly meso level and those things get managed, then obviously we have seen that. We've recently seen, for example, solar being used in agriculture. We saw, those were involved, those were installed at the farmers level, besides those which are installed at the rural feeder level. There was a marked difference. Those who are installed in the farmers level, all of them have not succeeded. Only those farmers were very aware, very educated. They know whom to call if something goes out of order. Only in those cases, and taken care of the maintenance, in those cases they have succeeded. All other cases they have failed. In Gujarat, I'm saying, the current state I'm in. And if you go to neighboring Maharashtra, for instance, which have rural feeder level solar system, they are obviously, because it is managed by an entrepreneur or a private player, people's job, livelihood are integrated with that. Therefore, they have succeeded. So I think the solution, lies in those dynamics. Yeah. Thank you.
Professor, with that, for Professor Benjamin and Professor Hipu, that is, we have 2-3 more important questions here, but I would quickly like to take up which is related to the solar energy only first. This Professor Satyendra here, he's telling here in the chat is that in spite of failure of solar cooker, do you still think that there is further scope, innovation in stoves or solar cooker which can help in energy transition in rural India? He's given an example also, like for solar cooker embedding with electricity production. So your quick response on this, please.
Yeah, so if I may just quickly say, so there is something which has been researched in the Indian Institute of Science, where, of course, Professor Benjamin might be aware about things that happened, elsewhere also. So what they are using solar energy is to heat a particular fluid whose temperature of boiling is somewhere around 400 degrees Celsius or below 300 to 400 degrees Celsius. And that fluid, when it is a very heated state, is being used, basically fed into the kitchen so that it goes in the pipe, and then you have the gas, and you basically cook, depending, same as you do with the LPG, you basically rotate your knob and get the fluid and cook at your own convenience. So this is basically a solar cooker 24/7. This technology is there, but not I think the commercialized to the extent it should be commercialized. So this is like solar cooker, not the box type, but the other type. Yeah,
Okay.
Professor Benjamin.
Yeah, Professor Hippo, thank you so much. And we have already got a message from Professor Benjamin that he has one more meeting lined up.
Yep.
Thank you so much, sir, to be amongst us and for this enlightening session. Definitely sets us thinking. Definitely is a way forward for the future.
You're very welcome. And please, send any other questions to me and Hipu via email, and I'd be happy to try to answer them. If I have answers, I may not know the answer. But thank you very much. And Hipu, it's always a pleasure. You should introduce me every time. You did such a nice job. So have a wonderful evening and stay safe.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Take care, sir. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
What a wonderful session we did have, definitely. And keeps us like a lot of energized, in fact. Okay, so we definitely, we have Dr. Raman Ramachandran amongst us. Sir, very warm welcome to this conference as an invited speaker here. Dr. Raman Ramachandran is a leader with a proven record of leading organizations and businesses to success across Asia Pacific and South Asia. Sir has spent almost 22 years with BASF, the world's largest chemical company, and has held several leadership positions, including Asia Pacific Business Head for BASF Agricultural Products, Head of BASF South Asia, and Chairman and Managing Director of BASF India Limited. He retired from BASF in March 2019 and subsequently joined PI Industries as an MD and CEO. Though he has stepped down from the operational role as of 31st of December 2021, but continues to be on the board of PI Industries. Dr. Raman is also the Vice Chairman on the board of Caliber Chemicals Private Limited and Director of the Proclean Technologies. Dr. Raman has a PhD in agriculture from University of Adelaide, Australia. He has spent early part of his career in academic research at international research centers such as ICIPE in Kenya, IRRI, Philippines, and University of Wisconsin, Madison. Dr. Raman was recently awarded Lifetime Achievement Award by the Chemical and Petrochemical Group of FICCI. Dr. Raman is also a certified coach and very passionate about organizational energy and leadership. Of course, now the time comes in, sir is in the current role with KG Somaiya Institute of Management. He's Professor of Practice and Chairperson and on the MDP department here. A very warm welcome, sir. Very warm welcome here. And the floor is all yours. Session.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Shabani. First of all, I feel like a sheep in a den of wolves. With all the professors and academicians around. As you heard, I've spent bulk of my life in a corporate environment, although I do have a kind of an academic roots. But I kind of listened to most of the last conversation and presentation, and I was quite intrigued, about the challenges of the transition. And during my talk, I'll probably also allude to a couple of my own personal experiences on how policies favor or disfavor adoption of technology. My own talk is going to be not on energy transition, although I will allude to a couple of places where energy is going to be a very, very important feature, and the transition to the green energy as a key driver to sustainability. But bulk of it is going to be about chemical industry, which is, by the way, one of the largest consumers of energy, and how it is important for the chemical industry to transition into sustainability, and what are some of the leading companies doing, and perhaps what are some of the challenges that the companies face. So let me start by, let me just share some slides here. So So as you can see, the title of my talk is Chemistry Powers Sustainability. And I truly believe this because a lot of the developments around sustainability, whether it is electric vehicles, whether it is biodegradable plastics, this really rests on cutting edge innovations in chemistry. Yeah? In an electric battery, how do you improve the anode and cathode efficiency is to a great extent a chemical phenomenon, and that's why I love to use this phrase that chemistry really powers sustainability. Before we get into the details, I actually, I'm sure each one of us have our own stories on how we got, kind of this great conviction about the importance of sustainable development. And I want to really use a couple of examples. You heard during my introduction that I spent some time in Kenya. I actually spent this, very remote part on the shores of Lake Victoria. And one of the things that I learned while living there was this big transition or the kind of ecological catastrophe that happened because of despite a well-meaning intervention that was introduced into Lake Victoria. Lake Victoria has a lot of natural local wildlife, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, because I got a call from the institute, so I wasn't sure whether this, because I was not audible. So I'll just continue now. Yeah, as I was saying, during my time in living in Africa, I came to know that the Lake Victoria had a lot of local fish, and the people around what is called as the Lake Basin countries, which is Nigeria, Kenya, and Uganda, really lived on fishing and banana farming. Sometime in 1955, somebody looked at this fish and said, "Hey, this is really doesn't have much flesh on it. It's very small. So in order to increase the efficiency, we should introduce what is called as the Nile perch, which is a fairly big, fleshy kind of a fish from obviously Nile into Lake Victoria." And in about 20 years after the introduction, because Nile perch is a highly carnivorous, highly decimating kind of a fish, the entire local fish population got completely clear, almost to the point of being extinct. Now, so here is a case of a well-intended kind of an action which led to this tremendous consequence. And it's not just that this local fish became extinct, it had a lot of other social ramifications. For example, when the local fish was there, the fishermen would go out in the boats and they could use the traditional kind of nets and they could catch the fish. And they would dry the fish, open in the sun, and because it had less fat, the drying happened fairly quickly. But once the Nile perch was introduced, it's a much more difficult fish to catch. So it became very difficult to catch it. And more importantly, because it had a lot more fat and protein in it, drying was very, very difficult. And hence they had to start cutting down trees because they had to use fire in order to dry these fish. So you can kind of think of the social ramifications and the ecological ramifications of this very well-intended kind of initiative, So that's one example. The second one is over about, between late 90s and 2010, I spent a lot of time in Singapore working in a regional management role. And I basically saw China going from a net exporter of agricultural produce to importing agricultural produce, particularly soybean and corn from Brazil and US. Now, the magnitude of the import, the quantity that are imported are frightening. For example, China imports about 40 to 45 million metric tons of soybean from Brazil and North America. And just to put this in context, India has about 11 million hectares of soybean that is grown and produces about 11 to 15 million metric tons. So China is importing about 3 to 4 times what India produces on 11 million hectares of soybean, and gives you a kind of an idea of how when things reach a tipping point, it just kind of gets out of hand. By the way, China also grows corn over 33 million hectares with some of the highest productivity in the world. And yet they are dependent on import of corn, primarily because of the animal farming that happens, particularly pig, which consumes, for which all these things are imported. So it gives you an example of how sustainable development has multiple ramifications. The one that really brings home the importance of sustainable development is this concept called Earth Overshoot Day, which is measured by the Global Footprint Network Institute, and they've been measuring this from 1970 onwards. And basically what it measures is what percentage of the resources on the Earth is being replaced in a calendar year. And you can see in the 1970s, we were more or less equilibrium. However, by 2018, the Earth Overshoot Day was on the 1st of August, which means basically from the 2nd of August, we were living on resources that we were borrowing from the next calendar year. So this is just to highlight, these are some of the incidents that really, there are several others which increase my conviction to sustainability. Now, as was mentioned in the introduction, I spent a long time in the chemical industry, and chemical industry doesn't really have a great public perception. However, it is vital to any growing economy, and I think many of you probably know that. But it has had very, very serious issues, both at global level and also in India. China, for example, used to be, the supplier of a lot of basic chemicals to the world up until about 2017, 2018, when Chinese government realized the level of pollution that some of these industries were causing, and really brought in a lot, which was across like 31 provinces, and you can see almost 180 million euros was collected as fines. Almost 2,000 people were, put in prison. And in India, we have our own cases of, and I'm sure you've read in papers about the Sterlite copper factory in Tuticorin being shut down. There are tanneries in Tamil Nadu being shut down because of almost, unacceptable levels of pollution that these industries were carrying. But on the other hand, India has also been very forward in introducing certain policy. For example, in 2017, India switched to the Bharat 6 emission norms, which is equivalent to the European emission norms for all the automobiles, which required all the automobile companies to really seriously rejig some of their emission control devices, incurring changes in their manufacturing setup and also incurring higher costs. So these are some examples which indicate today that sustainability is a kind of a license to operate in the chemical industry today. And now there are lots of other pressures on industries. I will not go into that, including consumer pressure. Financing is increasingly being linked to your own sustainable practices. So I think any company or an enterprise which is thinking long-term need to think in terms of sustainable development. And a core of that obviously tends to be energy transition from the conventional to more renewable energy. Let me just give you one example in the chemical industry where this transition is undergoing in a very significant process. Now, again, I'll have to tell you a story here dating back to maybe more than 100 years, and it relates to this small circle in the middle called the Haber-Bosch process. Yeah? In the late 1800s, the Western Europe was really struggling to have fertilizers for agriculture. Up until then, they used to use what is called as a saltpeter, which was dug out from the islands along the coast of South America, and this was shipped to the Western Europe, and this is what was used as fertilizers. And saltpeter is nothing but bird shit, to use a very colloquial term, that piled up on these small islands along the coast of Southern America. Over a period of mining, people realized that they have started to hit the the soil and the rock, and they were depleting the saltpeter resources quite rapidly. So in the early 1900s, there was actually quite a worry in Europe that the Malthusian law of geometric proportion of population increase and death due to starvation might actually now become a reality. And that's where scientists were looking at how do we overcome this, and a particular scientist by name Fritz von Haber, who was working in Karlsruhe University in Germany, actually was able to realize that the air is full of nitrogen, so you could actually, under pressure and with a lot of electricity, actually convert the nitrogen in the air with hydrogen and produce ammonia. And this was called the Haber-Bosch process. This is the first and a very, very critical kind of a discovery or invention in chemistry, which then led to the whole age of organic synthetic fertilizer. And in fact, it is actually considered as one of the 100 inventions globally which changed the face of humanity on this earth. There is even an estimate that 40% of the people who are alive in the planet today directly owe their life to this single invention. Yeah. Now, Haber-Bosch process, as you can imagine, is a very, very energy intensive process. So, however, this has been a crucial kind of chemical reaction in the chemical industry. And as you can see here today, it consumes about 1% or 2% of the global energy output and releases about 500 metric tons of carbon dioxide. Yeah? So it's used in nitrogenous fertilizers, it's used in a number of different applications. Now, what is now happening is the use of green hydrogen in order to replace the conventional way of producing ammonia. And here, you know, the sustainable green sources of energy is used in order to electrolyze water and bring hydrogen and nitrogen together to produce ammonia. And this is considered to be a huge transition in use of energy in the chemical industry. However, there is a long way to go, because today green hydrogen with the renewable energy costs of about 4 to 7 rupees a unit costs somewhere around 500 rupees a kilogram to produce. And compare that with gray hydrogen. When I say gray hydrogen, this is hydrogen produced with natural gas, where the emissions are then sequestered, and hence it is, you know, a little bit more sustainable way of producing hydrogen. It costs only 150 rupees. So there is still a long way to go, but I'm sure that you know, the human ingenuity kind of you know, rises up to these occasions, and very soon we will have green hydrogen at the price of about $2 or $2.50 when this really becomes economically viable. By the way, the government of India on the 17th of February, actually this year, the Ministry of Power has released a green hydrogen policy, which really favors more investments into innovation in order to produce the green hydrogen. Yeah? So this is one example of a core chemical reaction which is waiting for transition in terms of the energy. The second example that I want to use here is the plastic recycling. Now, every one of us, you know, are very, very close to this whole phenomenon of plastic. Our country, unfortunately, the landscape is littered with plastic. There is, again, lots of policies. There is plastic waste management policy and producer responsibility, EPR as it is called, which is all trying to address this entire plastic pollution. There is about 250 million metric tons of plastic waste that is generated globally, and of that only about 20% is recycled. Now, the company that I worked for 22 years, BSF, has looked at this and came up with a technology called pyrolysis technology, where you can take plastic of any origin. Now, one of the challenges of a conventional plastic recycling is that it cannot really use mixed plastic sources, yeah, and it cannot use contaminated plastic. It can only use, so there is already quite a bit of energy and water are cleanants that are wasted in order to get them cleaned for it to be recycled. But with a pyrolysis technique, You don't need these preconditions. So it basically takes the plastic and breaks it down into what is called as a pyrolysis oil, which is basically back to its original form of petroleum feedstock, as we call it, which can then be used to make quite a lot of conventional plastic products, which goes into automobiles, which goes into quite a number of other packaging materials, etc. There is even a certification program today, which would certify products that are produced from such pyrolysis techniques. Now, there is a large number of companies across the world which actually do pyrolysis technique, including at least 2 companies that I know of, which has the capability to use the pyrolysis technique in India. However, again, it is yet not an economic process. And here again, I think there is a lot of collaborative research that is happening with companies like BASF, which is trying to make this whole process much more economical, with the hope that this will really increase the adoption of such practices, and hence the rest of the 80% that just goes into the environment today can also be recycled. And more importantly, our reliance on the non-renewable petroleum sources for producing plastic will also then drastically come down. So that's another experience that I had, which I thought I will share with you. The third part I wanted to really allude to is a chemical industry is a classic linear industry. It has always relied on, petroleum feedstock, produced materials. The waste is then kind of sent out, and the product then gets used and discarded. Obviously, this is no longer possible, and so there is a great effort at chemical industry at the leadership level to try and transition into more circular economy. And what is and these are, by experience, 5 drivers that really these chemical industry is looking at in order to make this transition. The first is, of course, product and portfolio design. Product design, to a great extent, is also influenced by regulations. I think there are a lot of climate regulations which are starting to influence product design by the chemical industry. To give you one example, those of you who are familiar with farming, there are pesticides that are used to control insects, diseases, and weeds. If you go back 20, 30 years ago, these products required perhaps about 1,000 kilograms of an active ingredient per hectare in order for it to do its job. Today, the same products require about 3 to 5 grams per hectare. Of course, there is this huge challenge of how do you formulate it to distribute 3 to 5 grams across 1 hectare of land, which is 10,000 square meters. But that's where it has reached. And the one key thing that has enabled this to happen is strict regulations globally, regulations which is looking at toxicological environmental properties, which has really driven companies to invest into research and come up with these products which are more benign to the environment and to people. And also, the quantity that is used is reduced quite substantially. Sustainable raw materials are input, and I want to share an anecdote here which kind of illustrates the importance of policy in adoption of this transition to more sustainable energy sources. I was involved at one point in about 4 or 5 years ago in setting up a joint venture in the Mundra port for setting up a petrochemical plant. Now, the CEO of the global company BASF, who has a strong commitment to sustainability, said that we will only do this if you guarantee that the entire energy for the plant will be only through sustainable sources, either wind or solar energy. Now, I thought this was, not a very difficult thing to do before I realized that in Gujarat, there is actually a policy which does not allow private enterprises from using these renewable energy for more than 50% of the quantity that you have committed to buy from the energy source. Now the logics, I went up to the senior most person in the government to try and argue, why is this? And the logic that they told me was that, look, we have to subsidize farmers' electricity. And we won't be able to subsidize electricity to the farmers if the industry does not buy it. Now, if all of you have captive green sources of energy, then how are we going to subsidize the farmers? So it gives you a little bit of, there was this great discussion about policies in the previous session, and here is an example of how such policies sometimes, kind of hinder this transition despite, significant commitment from the entrepreneurs as well. I won't touch too much on process design and recovery flows, except to say that in the process design, there is a lot of there is a number of new technologies in the chemical industry, whether it is using enzymes for separating isomers, which were all very energy intensive, complex processes, which is now lends itself to more biological intervention, which is really making these more green chemistry than it was in the past. But the one that I wanted to really touch upon is how business models can really create an environment for more sustainable practices. For example, there is a practice called chem cycling. And the chem cycling philosophy is that as long as chemical companies are incentivized to sell more volumes of the product, sustainability and circular economy is unlikely to happen. And hence we need to look at ways whereby, the business models are changed to have where the companies are incentivized not to sell more products, but to achieve a service objective. Let me give you a specific example. The cars that you drive are all painted with pigments and paints, and those paints are often produced by chemical companies. Even today in India, the chemical companies or the paint companies would, ship drums of these paints to Maruti Suzuki or Mahindra, and in the paint shop, those paints will be used. But the places like Germany, where Mercedes does not do this, Mercedes has paint shops, which is actually kind of rented out to the paint companies. And Mercedes says that, look, we don't buy paint from you anymore. What we will pay you is, per square meter of paint that you do. We will decide what color, what tint, etc. You take over the paint shop, and we will pay you for every square meter of car that you have painted. Now, if you think about this business model, the company that is producing the paint is no longer, looking at how do I sell more paint. It is starting to think about how do I use less paint to get the same level of service that Mercedes wants. So here is one example. I think Asian Paints in some ways in India for house painting adopts this model. So these are, from a management perspective, how do we look for business models which will enhance the transition, not only from an energy source, also into more sustainable practices would be something that would be really worth, studying and researching more. I just want to use this one example primarily to talk about how cross-company collaborations are becoming very important if you want to achieve sustainable outcomes. Many of you may not know that India is one of the biggest producers of castor and castor oil. And most of the castor oil that is produced is actually exported out of India and sent to places like China, where it is converted into something called sebacic acid. And the sebacic acid is, has a very, very wide application in the specialty chemical industry, particularly in the areas of cosmetics, etc. Many companies which are leaders in cosmetics, for example, L'Oreal, they're quite concerned about where are these products coming from. And they want to make sure that the chemical companies which provide these materials that goes into various perfumes and various other beauty products are sustainably produced. And castor, because of that, and castor oil, because of the very important role that it plays, was something that I personally was involved in developing a sustainable production system, along with another competing company called Arkema. and a company called Giant Agro Organics. Yeah. So this is just to illustrate the need for collaboration even between competitive companies in order to, because sometimes size and scale becomes extremely important in rapid adoption and rapid transition. Yeah. So I will sum and end with this few summary statements. The chemical industry in India is about $140 billion, and it has tremendous growth, and particularly now that China is slowly seen as not the only country that people can go to for supplying chemicals. There is a particular phenomenon called China Plus. Everyone wants an alternative to China, and the Indian chemical industry obviously is the industry that can provide this alternative to the global buyers. So we expect that this will grow double digit at least over the next 10 to 15 years. And of course, the Indian chemical industry is a driver of many other industries, whether from agriculture to auto. I mean, you take a car, and at least 30% of the car is nothing but specialty chemicals. It is also one of the most energy intensive industry, and it is a classic linear industry. Yeah. But innovation and science, and I gave you some examples of how science and innovation is helping the industry to kind of transition. But most importantly, I believe that regulations and well-designed policies. I talked about the green energy policy for industries, and in some of the states, these are going to become extremely important. And so it might also, as academics, would be good to look at these policies, how they are favoring or disfavoring this transition, and really help the governments and the industries to take the right decision and move forward. So with that, I must really thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity. I realize that this is not a very academic presentation. This is a very anecdotal presentation, but I do hope that you've kind of been able to get some insights from the experience that I've had with the industry. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Absolutely, sir. It's like what we are understanding is hands-on experience sharing by you. That makes a lot of sense, drawing sense of what theory we read and how we relate. Sir, we have questions lined up for you. May I, if you allow me? Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
So from the audience, it comes in like the first question that comes in is, having headed the biggest chemical company in the world, from a leadership point of view, how can an organization practice and optimize the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit? Yeah, sir. Yeah.
So let me first clarify. I didn't head the world's largest company all over the world. I only headed one part of it in South Asia, which is India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. So how can we make triple bottom line as business leaders? I think it is about conviction. Yeah, it is about taking that stand. I gave you the example of how the CEO of BASF, when we were trying to make this huge petrochemical investment, and by the way, that investment was, when it was conceived, a 2 billion euro investment. It would have been one of the largest investment by any foreign company in India. It has got delayed due to COVID, and I still hope that it happens. But to be able to take that kind of stand when you're leading organizations, to have that conviction that this is not, running an enterprise is not just about profits. Yeah, it has, an enterprise needs to create value to the customers, it needs to create value to the society, and otherwise it will not be sustainable. Companies, so BASF has been in existence for 158 years now. Yeah, and I guess it is those kinds of principled approach to business which allows companies to last a century and a half, when even countries haven't been able to exist that long.
I think just to add up to what you have said, or maybe you can correct me, it's like mostly, as the recent information also states, it coming like top down, it's like more into the implementation. Yeah. So mostly all the leaders are of different big organizations are, reiterating the same thing that you are saying right here.
Absolutely. I mean, Paul Polman in, Unilever is a great example of how a single man's conviction kind of transitioned that company to a great extent to more sustainable kind of practices.
Correct, correct. And same we have, if we have read a bit of it, examples in Ranu's book also, wherein a lot of practices which she has brought in. Sir, we have I would like to take up the second question for you is what drives transition from gray hydrogen to green hydrogen? Is it government policies only? How long the transition may take given the cost of electricity producing using from solar is high?
Yeah, so I think one driver is the cost of the green energy, whether it is wind or, and that actually, as was also talked about in the previous, it has come down quite dramatically and continues to come down. Today it is about 4 to 7 rupees. The second driver, I believe, and I'm not a technologist who is on the top here, but I believe the second driver is really, the whole process of making that happen. How do you make that reaction much more efficient? Yeah. But I can only say that Reliance, for example, believes that they would be able to bring this to under $2 in maybe another 5 to 6 years time. Yeah.
Okay, sir, I would like to take up the third question. In fact, the last question, sir. So this is something which is similar, which I also was having in my mind. I think a couple of things which came out during the time when Professor Benjamin and Professor Hippo was also discussing is that how can government play a proactive role in ensuring private players practice sustainability? Just to touch up that, Professor Hippo was also mentioning during the last discussion that at some point of time you need to delegate some portion of it to the private parties, definitely to ensure a smooth transaction. So if in those lines, thinking on those lines, the question again is how can government play a proactive role in ensuring private players practice sustainability?
Yeah, so I guess there are two things. One is regulations, right? Let me give you, three. So regulations clearly, and regulations sometimes which are drastic, which can have short-term impact on certain enterprises. And let's take the example, an industry or that I am very familiar with, which is the agrochemical industry. And I alluded to, for example, 30, 40 years ago, we used to use 1 kilogram and 1.5 kilograms of active ingredient. These are old organophosphorus compounds, which are highly toxic. Banning some of these compounds for use in agriculture would facilitate newer and newer, better, more sustainable products to be easily adopted by the farmers, right? Anything that is new, anything that is, product of innovation will cost more. But if there is a much cheaper alternative that, kind of is a solution for the same thing, those we heard the previous speakers talking about, some farmers who are very forward-looking adopt solar panels and solar energy, but most of them do not because the alternative is so much cheaper. So I think that's where the regulations come in to really prevent the use of some of those unsustainable products. So the more sustainable products that are available would have more rapid adoption. I think the second most important is really encouraging innovation. And I think this is where there is a lot more, I believe, needs to be done in the Indian context. We have an intellectual property regime, which is a good start. If you look at the last couple of years of budget, a lot of the incentives that used to be there for investment in research and development have been withdrawn. In the last budget, for example, there was actually a clause where if you're going to be setting up an R&D center, And if you are importing heavy, highly costly equipments from abroad, there were duty waivers that were available to companies who were importing them for research and development. This was completely taken off. And the unfortunate thing is that nobody even talked about it. The media didn't talk about it. Only those who really are interested in these kind of areas actually came to know that, oh, this has been withdrawn. So I think there is a need to really encourage innovation, because transitioning into sustainable development requires tremendous amount of technology and tremendous amount of innovation. And the third piece would be the policy, and we talked about, for example, the energy policy. If you have policies which is based on the principle of let me rob Peter and pay Paul, I think some of these transitions will not happen at the speed at which we would like it to happen.
Okay, that's like 3-4 important points that we can note it down. Sir, we have a question from Professor Hippo. I think I would rather request Professor Hippo to ask the question. Sir, if you can go directly, yeah.
Yeah. So am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Yeah. So, well, I have a question, maybe exactly not what you talked about the chemical industry, but one thing is quite disturbing, that a report which came out last week, that, air quality report across the cities of the world. And again, as you know, Indian cities, I mean, almost 63 cities are there in the top 100, 35 in the top 50, 14 in the top 20, and 6 in top 10. So this is something which we have been, we have overtaken China, quite rapidly. I mean, Chinese cities, when we were younger, actually Chinese cities used to top those lists, but then we have overtaken it substantially. So what do you think, what we need to do for this, and what went wrong, and what, I mean, how can we breathe clean air? Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah, so Professor Nathan, I mean, that's a very, very complex kind of a question because it's got multiple dimensions, and I really wish there is a shotgun kind of an approach to this. But if, from my perspective, again, sometimes really hard actions are required. Look at how did China, in a matter of last maybe 4 to 5 years, managed to bring some of this under control, was really going after polluting industries. And I think in one of my slides, I talked about specifically how almost, I don't know, something like 150 million euros of fines were collected from companies, almost 1,600 people were, put into prison. So that's an extremely drastic action, that to make sure that the laws are abided by. So that I would say that would be one, to introduce laws, and then really make sure that those laws are implemented irrespective of who the person is. The second one would be really it all comes back to policies, and I'm talking about, for example, the burning of rice stubbles in Punjab and Haryana. Now there are laws there, but I think the problem there is that the alternatives are not as viable and available. So, if you make very strict laws, I think we need to also make sure that there are alternatives which are, might be more cumbersome to adopt, but at least there are alternatives. And I think there is not enough of that. And that's one of those problems there. So I would say these are a couple of examples that I can think of. But yeah, it's not a very easy question. But look, where I get a hope is that 35 years ago, the Rhine River and parts of Western Europe was also not very different from what we have today, right? Highly polluted, but today Rhine is perhaps one of the cleaner rivers. I mean, many Western cities are much cleaner. So the possibility exists, the technology is there. I think there is political will that is required in terms of well thought through laws, and more importantly, implementation of those laws very consistently. So,
Thank you.
Professor Nathan, I don't know, does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I mean, in fact, when I was doing one research related to indicators, I had come across, way back in 1989, China introduced something for the urban air quality assessment. They have something called Urban Environment Quality Examination System. And they used to rank the cities internally. And the city mayors actually had a virtual competition, to basically see that, they are so.
Absolutely.
So that my city should not be, should lose rank every year. It should relative to other cities. It must lose some rank in terms of the pollution rank. And in that sense, that actually, in an indicator exercise, we consider this as a positive competition among the cities, and that helped. I mean, in a way, that method helped. Of course, as you had mentioned, the regulations, the fine, the strict implementation, the shifting of the industries, adding a lot of pollution abatement technologies in the power plants, and all that must have helped. But then I don't know. I mean, in India, I mean, this something we have to do. Probably I don't know how many source apportionment studies have been done in India, for example, to find the kind of PM22.5 concentration we are getting in our cities, where from it is coming from, which industries, how much vehicular, how much other sources. Because they can, as you know, they can come from variety of
multiple
sources. So then, so once you identify the problem, then you solve it, right? I am not very sure whether those identifications have been done, because now every city, Ludhiana, Kanpur, I mean, those are the ones, on topping the list world. They're coming as the toppers in the top 10, as well as even the.
Professor Nathan, one more thing, and I know this from a chemical industry perspective, is also how do you create? I mean, look, enterprises have to exist, manufacturing has to happen, but can you create integrated, sites where different companies can come together, and then you have common kind of utilities, common effluent treatment, common air quality measurement. I think this is also one way, and China is also adopting this in a big way. So they have specialized industrial parks for certain kind of industries. Singapore is a great example, the Jurong Island, which is a complete chemical park. I mean, they've been able to put all of them there. So the companies also have a motivation and incentive to be part of that ecosystem, and much easier for governance also to take place. So I guess, and last but not the least, I think education. I think we need to, and we have come a long way, in my opinion. Much of the younger generation understands this. But I think as educational institutions, I think we need to continue to really create the awareness through examples, through our educational modules, and really have citizens come out from our institutions who understand this, and if they get to the certain places of influence, they are able to then provide that leadership. So I think that is also something that we as educational institutions have a great responsibility to.
Yes, agree with that, Dr. Raman. At least we should go ahead with, should give a try from all the aspect of our fraternity, that some sort of awareness is needed. Maybe the first, we have the students with us, the student community with us, maybe the younger generation. So we have that resource with us, and we should actually utilize that resource, definitely. With that, we would like to come to a close with the session, the first day of the conference, and what a wonderful way it went, actually. A lot of knowledge, a lot of brainstorming, a lot of new information, and I mean, we had just had had a plethora of discussions of different aspects we had together. So with that, we're just hoping forward and looking with a lot of energy for the next 2 days to come in, that is tomorrow and day after tomorrow. Dr. Raman, thank you so much for being with us. We are indeed privileged to have you with us with so much of insights that you have brought in for the industry and the questions you have addressed. With you and the audience, just to remind them that tomorrow we start a session at 10 a.m. So with request of 5 minutes early login. And we do have Dr. Debojit Palit from the Rural Energy and Livelihoods, the director there, would be giving us a talk on India energy transition, the way forward, and followed by Roma Valwani, who would be enlightening us on environmental, social, and governance topic altogether. So see you all there tomorrow at 10 a.m. with us. Thank
Thank
you so
you.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.